encouraging academic excellence through iPad profiles. We have with us today Rob Brown, who is the Director of Technology at Foxcroft Academy in Maine. So let's welcome Rob to the stage.
Thank you. As Paul said, I'm Rob Brown from Foxcroft Academy. I've been the Director of Technology there for 16 years, and today I'm here to talk about encouraging academic excellence through iPad profiles. So for our agenda, I will talk about our philosophy around iPads at Foxcroft Academy and how we've really built a culture in our school around the iPads. I will talk about how we use restrict the app usage restriction to whitelist apps. I'll talk about how we actually push that profile, that restriction out using smart groups and our extended LDAP attributes. I'll talk about results. Is it working for us? What we've seen. We've only been doing it a short time, but we've seen some results, so I will share those with you. And then at the end, I will talk about some additional ways we use that functionality to do some other things with our iPads. So, who is Foxcroft Academy? We are located in central Maine, pretty much dead center of the state. We're in the town of Dover, Foxcroft. It's in Piscataquis County. Town is a little over 4,000 people, so it's a pretty small town. We are the second largest by size county and the second poorest county in the state, and we are also the smallest by population county in the state. We are a town academy. We were established in 1823. We were the first school to be chartered after Maine became a state. We started with our iPads programs in 2011. When we originally started our pilot project, we had the original iPad. When we went with one-to-one with our students, we actually had the iPad 2s had just come out, so we went with the iPad 2s. And we were the first high school in the state to go one-to-one iPads. We serve the local community, the local school district, as they're sending high school. We're 9 through 12. So the local school district sends all their students to us. Some of the surrounding school districts who have school choice, they send some of our students, but we're also a boarding school. And we have a fairly good-sized boarding program. We have about 450 students in our school. About 80% of that is the day students, and 20% are boarding students. And this year we have pretty close to 20, I think it might actually be 19, countries represented at our school. So we have a pretty diverse population at our school. As I said, we were the first high school to go iPads in 2011. So our philosophy around the iPad is that we want this to be a personal learning tool for the students, that we want them to be able to explore, we want them to become self-aware of their strengths and their interests and use this as if it were their own device. So our goal is to not restrict the iPad any more than we have to. We do some restrictions on all iPads. There are some apps that have been abused, and we might restrict an app here, and there are some reasons that we do restrict the iPads, but what we really try to do is let the students use it as if it were their own iPad. So the iPads are unrestricted unless one of a few conditions occur. One, if a parent requests that their student iPad be restricted, maybe they don't want them using a specific app, maybe they don't even want them to bring it home. We try to honor those requests from the parents that we restrict it, how they wanted to have it restricted. We also will restrict them if they have an outstanding financial balance with us for, say, they've broken the iPad and they owe for an insurance deductible, or they've lost parts. That's another reason we'll actually restrict the iPad. If they have a history of damaging the iPads, unfortunately, we've had students who have broken 3, 4 iPads in a year. At that point, you get very restricted. We take your iPad, put it in the library, and you can only use it when you have a pass from your teacher. And the other way that we restrict it, which is what we're here to talk about today, is if you're on academic probation, we restrict it. And when I say restricting, I mean we are just allowing you to use a certain set of apps that we've defined as school apps. So if you get on academic probation, you have that restriction. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But the iPads really have become part of our school culture. We're one-to-one, so obviously all our students get iPads, all our teachers get iPads, as well as a MacBook Air. We're governed by a board of trustees, and one of the perks of being a trustee is that you get to have an iPad. We'll buy you an iPad, and when you retire from being a trustee, you get to keep the iPad. We have iPads for our substitutes. They come in, we have a pool, and they just grab an iPad. We've set up accounts for all our substitutes because since we're a small community, we really have a small pool of substitutes, which somebody in the school knows them personally probably because we're so small. We set up accounts for them. They come in, grab an iPad, log into it, sets it up with their stuff for substituting for that day. We distribute our handbooks, both student handbooks, faculty handbooks, our policies, daily announcements are on there as a web clip. We give them a calendar. We use them in our boarding program and the boarding school management software to sign kids in and out of the dormitories. Teachers are using iTunes U all the time. A few years ago, we implemented portfolios for our students, so all the students have to do a portfolio and present that portfolio before the faculty, before they graduate. That's all done with iTunes U on the iPad. So you can see that iPads are pretty important around what we do at Foxcroft Academy. So like I said, we try not to restrict them, but there are occasions when students are not doing well, and we have to maybe kind of guide them in a direction and maybe keep them away from getting distracted. So we set up this thing called academic probation. And basically what academic probation is, it's based on this thing we call a D and F list. A D and F list is simply, if you're getting a D or an F in any of your classes, you become on this D and F list. What that really is you have an unmet standard. We're standards-based, so if you have an unmet standard in any of your classes, you will have a D, or if you have 2 unmet standards in a class, you'll have an F. So we have this D and F list, and if you're getting a D or F in any of your classes, at the end of a reporting period, which we're semester-based and we have 4 reporting periods per semester, we generate a list of everybody who's getting a D or F. We generate that from PowerSchool. That's our school information system. It does a query, and it just looks for the students who have a D and an F, a D or an F, and it generates a report that is then shared with the IT department to set students in academic probation. And it also, at the same time, emails the students telling them, hey, you're not passing such and such class, and your iPad is going to be restricted. So they're aware of it, and they know what they have to do. So once we get that list of students on the DNF list, what we've developed is using Open LDAP, we've created an attribute in our Open LDAP server called FA Device Academic Probation. And that's just a value that we set. And basically, 0 means you're not on academic probation, 1 means you are on academic probation. So we take that list, and just using a Perl script, we go through, clear out everybody's academic probation, read that DNF list, and set everybody who's on that list, set this value to 1. And it's just simply a Boolean. Like I said, 0 means you're meeting standards, 1 means you're on academic probation. So now, once that's done, we have in our LDAP server, everybody who's on the DNF list and needs to have academic probation set up, and all their apps that are not school-related removed or hidden on their iPad. So what we did is we took this now, and this is the script that actually runs that sets all those. It's probably a little hard to see, but basically it just goes through. First thing it does is it queries the LDAP server for everybody who's already on academic probation and clears it, just to get a clean slate. It then just reads in that DNF list one at a time. That list actually is their email address, so this pulls off just their username, and then it just goes ahead and sets the academic probation for 1 for all of the students who are on academic probation. Just a simple script there. It takes literally 5 seconds to run. So now, what I did next was I set up an extension attribute based on that LDAP attribute. So we called our extension attribute academic probation. It's just a string. We use string because I have some ideas of how to use this in the future that will require it to be a string and not a numeric value. That's displayed under inventory display under user and location. That's an LDAP mapping, and it maps it to that FA-device-academic-probation. So now I have all my extension attributes set up, and every time a device does an inventory update, that field will get populated. I then created a smart group called academic probation, just to make things simple and flow. That's just a smart group based on the value of that academic probation extended attribute. If it's 1, you're part of the smart group. If it's 0, you're not part of the smart group. So now when we add somebody to academic probation in the LDAP server, as soon as they do an inventory update, sets that extension attribute to 1 and immediately makes them part of the smart group. So now that I've got my smart group set up, I end up creating a whitelist of apps. And basically what this is just using the restrictions and using the restrict app usage feature. I set it to only allow some apps. And I added to this all the apps that we're using in the school that the teachers have said, these are the apps that I want to use. Initially when we set it up, we'd been doing iPads for 4 or 5 years already. So kind of had a knowledge of what apps should be on this list. Some of the basic stuff that we use across the school, Pages, Keynote, Numbers, Safari, iTunes U, Edmodo, Notability. So I was able to originally generate this list with a lot of the apps. But as teachers wanted to use other apps, I'd have to keep adding them to this list. We're now up to over 100 apps. In fact, the last day of school, I had to add another app because the teacher wanted to use a new app that they'd found in there. So what happens is the teacher gets an app. They just submit a ticket to the support saying what the app name is and what class or students they want to have that app. And I go to Apple School Manager, make the purchase. If it's a free app, I purchase 500 copies of it so I can actually distribute it to everybody because I figure if maybe they're just using it for this class, but why not let all the students have access to it? Maybe they'll find some use for it. If it's a paid app, then I will scope it to, I'll purchase that number that we need, and then I'll go back into Jamf, and I will set it up. I will scope it to the appropriate groups, either, like I said, for free apps to everybody, or for a paid app to the classes or the students that teacher requested. Set that all up so it's available for the students in self-service. Then, excuse me, I will go into my configuration profile, and I'll add it to the list of apps there. As soon as I save, it asks me, do you want to save it, do I want it to push it out to any new scope or everybody? And I'll push it out to everybody that already has that list, and now they'll be able to download that app, and it'll show up on their device. Now this doesn't remove the app that are on this list, it just hides them. So if a student has been using an app for schoolwork and they have work in there, or they've been playing a game or whatever and they've got stuff that they don't want to lose, it doesn't go away, it just hides the app. So if they go and actually try to download an app that's not on this list, they'll see the whole thing go around and it's downloading the app and then boom, it disappears. But it's still there. So when they go off academic probation, it just pops back. And they haven't lost anything. So sometimes they freak out, oh, I lost all my stuff. No, you really didn't. It's okay. So now what I do is I scope this restriction to that group I created, that smart group, FA Academic Probation. So now when they get added to it, get added to academic probation and LDAP, they do an inventory update, they get added to the smart group, then this restriction is put on their app, on their iPad, and their apps go away, they get removed, they all come back. We also have a group of iPads in our library that we use in case an iPad is being repaired, or for some reason they don't have their iPad, they can borrow one from the library. That's also restricted to school apps only. And we can also use this for additional groups. If, for example, if a parent, like I said, wants their student to only have school apps, we can add them right to this scope here as well. And then even if the student is not on academic probation, but the parent requests them to only have school apps, they'll only get the school apps. So we did all this and set it all up and thought, oh, this is going to work great. And we ran into a couple of problems. So far, only 2 big ones. Hopefully there's not more out there. But one of the problems was we had to add a special bundle ID, this com.apple.social.sl Google Auth, to get the Google authentication working, because we are a G Suite for Education school as well, and all our students have Gmail addresses. We push out a profile to set up their Gmail settings, but they have to put their password in. As soon as we whitelisted things, without that didn't work any longer. So they couldn't log into their accounts. So we figured that one out. So we had to add that. The other one that we had to add was com.apple.webapp. All our web clips stopped working all of a sudden. So a little research, I figured out I had to add that. And so those are a couple special ones. If you're doing this, just be aware. Those aren't, you can't type it in and have it pop up automatically. You've got to type in those special bundle IDs. But that took care of those issues. So now we've got students, we're able to remove their apps, hide their apps if they're on academic probation. So what now happens if a student gets off academic probation? How does that happen? Well, the first thing they need to do is they need to meet all their standards. So they have to be meeting all their standards so that they're not on that DNF list anymore. So as soon as a student does that, their teacher has to notify the academic dean's office to let them know, hey, little Joey is now passing algebra. He's met all the standards. So they have to notify the academic dean's office, and they do that through just a simple Google form that they submit, and it goes to the academic dean's office. And the academic dean's office is keeping track of all of this, and they can decide, okay, so student is now passing this course that they were failing, and now they're passing this one, and when they're passing all their courses, they can remove them from academic probation, and they just have, the LDAP attribute has to be set up so that they can get off academic probation. So someone has to set that LDAP attribute, and I'm sure, if you're in IT, that you don't have anything else to do but sit around and wait for someone to tell you to update an LDAP attribute for 100 different students at any time. So since we didn't really want to be bothered with that, we decided, you know what? We don't make that decision whether they're actually on academic probation or not. That's the decision of the academic dean's office, so why not empower them to be able to do that? So we delegate. Anytime I can let someone else do my job, I am fine with that. So what we did is we created this web-based management interface. Prior to this, we had created a web-based this web interface so that advisors could go in and change the passwords of their students and reset them because, summertime comes, they don't remember the password, then they get back. And if I'm not updating LDAP attributes, I'd be changing passwords all the time. So I delegated that, and they come up to our office and say, hey, I forgot my password. I say, go see your advisor. They can change your password. So they can log in, the advisor can log in here, and they will see just their students, and they can set their passwords. But we also created what we call a super advisor that can see all of the students. And basically, super advisors are my department, academic dean's office, counseling services, some administrators, and a few other people. And like I said, when they log in, they see everybody's information. So we already had that in place, but we added this thing called academic probation, which is just a checkbox. And we've linked that to the LDAP server so that super admins can go in here and actually check and uncheck that academic probation checkbox, and it will set the LDAP attribute for them. Advisors can log in, they can see this, they can see the status, but it's all grayed out, so they can't change it. And we don't want them changing it because, as I'll talk about later, it's just a Boolean. So if they're on academic probation because of 2 different grades, one teacher can't remove them without knowing that that they're passing the other course too. So that's why we don't let teachers go in here and change this yet. I'm hoping in the future I'll be able to change that. But it's really just a simple web-based interface that's powered off our Apache web server. It's done through a Perl scripts and Java scripts. Just polls our LDAP server, creates the page, and then updates the attribute as you click on it. So the way the process really works is log into your web browser, you point to the Apache web server, that serves you up the page to authenticate. It authenticates against our LDAP server, and depending on what kind of a user you are, whether you're an admin or a super admin, if you authenticate successfully, it comes back, sends back the web-based, sends back the student management page, and from there you can click on to manage iPads, and the web server goes out, queries the LDAP server again, grabs all the students, for a super admin, grabs all the students. For a regular advisor, it would just grab a subset, but it grabs them all as well as the values for their LDAP attribute, and generates that page that you previously saw with the appropriate boxes checked or unchecked. And then sends that back to the user, to the browser. Now as the browser communicates back and forth, like when you check on those boxes, it automatically, instantly goes out to the LDAP server and changes that attribute. So you can toggle that off and on, and it's changing that value of 1 to 0 back and forth. Every time it gives you, when it succeeds, it gives you a little saved icon up in the corner to let you know that it's saved. If things fail, which hopefully that never happens, get a little red error message so you know that it's actually working. So that's how that flows through there. So now we've got it all set up. Students are able to be put on academic probation and removed quickly. The reason we could have actually had it set up so that the academic dean's office actually put them on academic probation with that same page, but there are anywhere from 75 to 100 students on academic probation at the end of each reporting period. And scrolling through that whole thing and checking on it would be a pain in the butt for them. So, and like I said, it takes me 5 seconds to run that script. So we usually set them all, and it's the academic dean's office that unchecks them all. So now that we've done that, is it working? We started this 2 years ago, so we've really had 2 years of results, and this is what we found. We looked at a couple different things. We looked at our DNF list and the change of that over the course of a semester. What we were looking at was how many students are on that on that DNF list throughout the semester, but then at the end of the semester, when grades finally close, how many of those actually passed the course? And we have here in 2015, this was prior to us implementing this, we found that just over 16% of the students who were on that list at some point during the reporting period actually ended up passing that course. So then in 2016, we implemented this, and we saw a significant change that now about 40% of the students, almost 40% of the students who were on that list somewhere during the semester were actually getting off that list and passing the course by the end of the semester. And then last year, numbers went down a little bit, but still significantly different from the year we weren't doing it, to 33%. So what we saw was that we had a change from about 16% of our students actually passing 16% of the students who were on academic probation actually passed the course at the end, as opposed to an average of 36% passing it now. So we thought that was significant. Another thing we looked at was multiple unmet standards. You have multiple standards in your course, you have multiple unmet standards through all the courses you're taking, and how many of these students are just barely on the DNF list because they have one unmet standard, and how many are on there because they have multiple unmet standards? So what we see here is in the red is the number of students who are on that DNF list who have multiple unmet standards. So 44% of our students who are on the DNF list were having more than one unmet standard, and that was in 2015, before we implemented this. And then in 2016, that decreased to 38%, and in 2017, that decreased to 31%. So we see a trend there. I mean, it's not huge changes, but it's changes. So we really feel that it's working to help our students stay off that DNF list and be on track. So besides the numeric, the charts here we have, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that we're seeing some changes in our students' behavior. So I've talked to many of the teachers, some of the administrators, and I have a few quotes up here from some of our teachers and administrators about how this is working. John Pratt, who's the assistant head of academics, he said students are actively seeking out teachers to resolve the iPad restrictions. So when a student gets off that DNF list, they're going right to the teacher and say, hey, send an email to, or fill out the form to academic dean's office so that I can get off in academic probation. We view that as, since they were actively seeking out the teacher, they were probably actively trying to get off that list. So that's a good sign. Ryan Nickerson, who's the head of our math department, he said they, students, are working harder to get off academic probation, even though sometimes for the wrong reason, to get their games. You know? Ideally, we'd like to see them get off that for the intrinsic value of getting a better grade, but sometimes it's a carrot and stick approach. If it works, you know, hey, if that's what it takes, and it works, that's, you know, good. George Ralston, who's head of our science department, students are bringing their grades up quicker, sometimes within 2 or 3 days, in order to unrestrict their iPads. One of the things that we had seen in the past is students would get off that DNF list, but they'd wait till last minute to make up all their work, because they really didn't care until that was the end result. Now, they've immediately got their iPad restricted. They're working harder, quicker, to get off that list. So we see that as a positive sign. And then from Mia Morrison, who was one of our English teachers, she moved on to higher education this year. She is a heavy iPad user, heavy into technology. She's a Apple Distinguished Educator. Her quote was, after their first experience on device probation, students realized they want to avoid losing access to the favorite apps and features for expression. It's been effective in keeping my at-risk students engaged and moving forward. So she's had real success with a lot of these at-risk students using iPads, and this has been part of it. One of her success stories that she talked to me about was a student named, we'll just call him Eli, he was a senior. He was an at-risk student. He was failing English. It was the last semester of the year. He wasn't going to graduate if he didn't pass English, and he wasn't real motivated for schoolwork, but he liked his iPad. So Ms. Morrison gave him a project based on the Geography of Poverty by Matt Black, and he took this project, which was a project looking at the result of poverty on architecture in his hometown, which I thought was really cool because it is also my hometown, Monson, Maine. Gigantic population of about 650 people. Used to be a mill town. The mill left several years ago. At that time, the town, literally, Main Street was falling down. Most of the buildings were abandoned. Some of them they've had to tear down now. There's a project to fix that now, but at this time, the town was just, it was a ghost town. And it was sad, having grown up there, to see what was happening to this town, but that was his hometown. So he started working on this project, and he worked on it to get his iPad out of restriction. That was one of his motivating factors, but he really got into this project. He really found relevance to the project. He just was empowered by this project to really look at how poverty had affected the architecture in town. And he went from that F to ending that course with a B+ and graduating. Now, if this was the movies, it would have been an A+, but hey, a B+, you know, going from an F to a B+ and graduating, that was quite a achievement for him. So that's just another example of how we see this actually working. Now, we built this all around Open LDAP as our back end, but this is actually portable, should be portable to any other directory service that supports custom attributes and gives you some way to interact either through a Perl module or an API to set those values in that directory service. We use variations of this for other things, for at the end of the year when it's time to collect iPads, and another one we use it for, even though this isn't really JAMF related, is campus restrictions. We are a BYOD school, so you can bring your own device. You just have to register it. We have a portal that redirects them to register their devices, and they can use their own personal devices at school, but sometimes that's a problem too, so we need to be able to restrict that. So you may have noticed when we were looking at it before that beside academic probation, we have device probation. Basically, this restricts them from using their personal device. In the same way, they're clicking on this, it's setting an LDAP attribute and allowing them to use or not use their personal devices on campus. Basically, if they're in device probation, they can't use their device on school. They can't use any devices that they've registered on school, and they can't register anymore. It just uses an LDAP attribute called FA-network devices active equals whatever. So one of the ways we actually use the academic probation and the device probation in a very practical way is enrollment paperwork. Every year they have to do enrollment paperwork, which is a big packet of papers, or they can do it online, but they have to do that every single year. Even if they did it last year, they have to do it this year, and they just don't want to do it. And it literally in the past has been into December. We started in August, we're into December, and they still haven't done their paperwork. And since we're serving the local school, we really can't expel them for not doing their paperwork. So it's been a hassle for years getting this paperwork done. So what we started doing was using the academic probation and the device probation to give them a little incentive to get the paperwork in. Before school starts, set everybody in academic probation and turn off their turn on device probation so that their devices won't work. Come to school, you get your iPad, you've got your school apps, you can't use your cell phone on our network, and that's a little motivation to get your paperwork in. I gave the administrative assistants access, supervisor access to that page so they can actually check off when a student has turned in the paperwork. And within 2 weeks, we had 95% of our paperwork in, and within a month, we had 100% of our paperwork in. So that's worked out really well, real practical example of how to use that. And it's a lot easier for them to get the paperwork in sometimes than it is to get off academic probation because you got it on the DNF list. So they do that pretty quick. So that is what we have. What do I looking at in the future? Where do I want to go with this? I'd really like to have more delegation so that it's not just up to the academic dean's office to be putting people on and off academic probation. I'd like to have it so that the teachers themselves can do it. But as I said, where it's a Boolean and it might be maybe more than one teacher, they're not passing more than one class, a single teacher can't do that. So I've been trying to think how I can do that, thinking maybe I can do that with a list. Just as a teacher checks that box, it adds that teacher's name to a list, and when the list is 0, you're not on academic probation. When it's not empty, you're on academic probation. So that's something I'd like to do when I have all my spare time. And I'd also like to have more real-time restrictions. Right now, you set them in academic probation, or more importantly, you remove them from academic probation. It doesn't give their apps back until it does an inventory update. So they go to the teacher, say, hey, send the email that I'm off academic probation. They send the email, and they look at their iPad, and their apps aren't back. They come running right up to our office. How come my apps aren't back? I'd like to be able to use the API or some other method to actually have it push an inventory update when you check on that box. That would make it a whole lot easier for us. The students would see it right away and make it a lot cleaner. So basically, that is what we're doing with profiles to try to encourage academic excellence. So thank you. And questions?
Any questions? Nobody gets to leave until somebody asks a question. That's what it is.
How do you prevent personal devices from being used in your school? Are you doing profiles on them?
No, what we do, when you register a device, it registers your MAC address in our LDAP server, and we block it on the firewall at the MAC address level. That MAC address has to match your assigned IP address, so you can't even fake. I mean, you could, if you're good enough, you can fake the MAC address in the IP address, but it's working pretty well.
So it looks like you kind of open it up pretty broadly to most students, so it makes sense that they'd want those apps back. Is there particular apps that when they do get off academic probation, I mean, is it stuff like social media apps, YouTube? What apps are they like binging to get like really want back?
Oh, the ones they really want back? Fortnite, Facebook. There you go. There's the top 2 ones right there. Yeah.
Did you guys ever consider not allowing any students to have access to those apps? I mean, to solve this problem in a different way?
To not access to anything but school apps? Or
Yes.
We did, but part of it is we want them to be, I'm trying to think of the term that I want to say here, good digital citizenship. These are high school students, so they're ready to go out in the real world. They're not going to have someone restricting their apps. So we also want them to be able to find apps themselves that might help them with schoolwork. And that's come across. I've had students come into my office and say, hey, I found this app. I can't remember now what it was, but he was using it to help him read. He was a student who had a slight reading problem, and he had found an app and it got restricted. So that's just an example of how they're out there finding their own apps to solve their problems. That it's not just games. Yes, largely it's games and social media, but we really didn't want to prevent that.
How are you, excuse me, how are you handling the other approval processes, such as like COPA compliance, U13, student data privacy, selling, advertising? We have lots of apps that sometimes they look great until you see the in-ad advertising that comes through and they're not appropriate. And so I don't know, how do you cover those kind of items?
I mean, obviously for apps that they download, we don't have any, that they personally download, we don't really have any control over that, what they do outside of the school with it. We do have, IT doesn't do it, but the academic dean's office does vet apps that are purchased and that they're going to use in the school. So that's how we handle that.
How do you restrict Safari, or are you restricting the internet on the iPad? I mean, they can just go to facebook.com.
We restrict, we have a filter at the Firewall, so we're filtering content there. So yes, they still have Safari as one of their apps because, I mean, they're going to need that for research. But while they're on campus, that filter does a pretty good job of filtering things out. I mean, it's like anything, they found a way around it. I mean, the simple way around it is, hey, I've got a cell phone, I'm going to tether to it. Or I'm just going to use my cell phone. You can restrict my device off your network, you can restrict my iPad, but I've got a cell phone and I'm sitting in the corner. I mean, what can I do? So.
So you're saying bring your own device.
Yep.
And you have parents who are totally okay with you restricting a personal device that you're allowing to be in your school.
We're not restricting their personal device on their device. We restrict them at the Firewall. But if you bring your own device, we don't manage that in any way. Is that what you mean?
Yes. So
Yeah,
when you're bringing your own device, you're saying they can come onto campus, they might connect, but the device for school is the one you've issued, and that's
Right.
the one you're restricting.
Right. We're only restricting the school device. And we're a boarding school, so that makes it a little more difficult that we have to be able to allow students to use their own device because they're living there. It's not just their school, it's their home for the school year. And they need to be able to communicate with their parents via Skype or WhatsApp or FaceTime. So that's a little bit more of a challenge for us than if we were just a totally public school that just had day students. So we have our filter that has one setting during the day, because in the evening, after school hours, social media is okay. So the filter has one set of rules from 8 to 3, and then another set of rules from 3 and around the clock till 8 again. So.
I was just curious to know if the presentation that your slides, if you would share those with us so we could see kind of your scripts. I don't know if is that shared?
Yeah, that's all going to be up, but I'm happy to share it with you personally as well too. Just give me your information.
Jen, I think we had another one right up here.
Okay.
I could either throw the mic or you got one?
I got it. Hi, Monica Merrill with Power School.
I noticed the
I appreciate the shout
big
out,
P.
the Power School, yeah. I'm curious, when you talked about, because it's not just the academic probation, your DNF list is also generated based on parental financial contribution or paperwork or other items. One of those was device destruction or mishandling.
Yeah.
Just out of sheer curiosity, how do those students complete their assignments if they don't have a device? Is that a situation where they have to bring a personal device?
So to get the device totally taken away, you've got to honestly really work at destroying devices. If you break your device, accidents happen. We have spares that you can use while yours is getting repaired. If it's taken away, then that teacher is notified, and that teacher has to provide an alternate way for that student to meet the standard. Like I said, that doesn't happen very often. Maybe 1 or 2 students a year that actually happens to, and some of those students, from our history, the ones that I've seen, have had individual learning plans already. So it really hasn't been an issue. But teachers do know that, we can also have we have this, it's there, but nobody's really used it. A parent can say, I don't want my student to have an iPad. What are you going to do then? We have to talk to the teacher and say, you need to provide a way for this student to meet those standards without an iPad. But fortunately, it hasn't come up very often.
What are you using for a firewall right now?
We're using a Linux firewall with IP tables, and we're using Dan's Guardian, which we're going to migrate to E2 Guardian because Dan's Guardian is stopped being developed as our firewall and our filter.
Well, we're using Palo Alto right now, and I run into the situation a lot. So I was trying to figure out when you have instances. I don't know if you ever have this instance where a parent says, "I want my kid not to have Netflix," but they can go on Facebook and all that stuff too. So do you ever have that where you have to really define? And if you do, how do you manage that?
I don't think we've quite had that situation.
I get it all the time.
Where so let me see if I understand what you're saying. The parent doesn't want them to have access to Facebook, but but still have access to another app. Facebook's a good one for us because it's blocked at the firewall that way. But what we could do, we'd handle on an individual basis, since I know their MAC address and their IP address, and they're set up in DHCP so that it gives them a reservation. They always get the same IP address. I could create a rule right on the firewall specifically for that device. That would be a nightmare if there was a lot of that, but fortunately there's not.
Hi, Monica Merrill with Power School.
I remember you.
Seems like just yesterday. I have a question. Pardon my ignorance. I'm actually in corporate social responsibility and community outreach. I'm not in the customer education or the technical side. But it seems like, I'm just wondering, why did you not choose to do a custom field added into your Power School at the class level, and then you could create that Boolean? Or maybe we should just talk offline about being an amazing case study for doing something like that, to have it be dynamically synced with your Apple School Manager. And then you'd avoid all of your scripting back and forth. Was that a consideration or no?
Because I didn't think of it.
Okay.
How's that for an honest answer? We're not using Apple School Manager to create our classes. We don't use Managed Apple IDs. So I use that just basically to buy my books and stuff. We actually wrote a custom script that goes out and polls the Oracle database for Power School, and then creates all our classes for us and puts the students in those classes. So that's our link. We did that just before Apple came out with Apple School Manager. So this is another presentation I did 2 years ago on that, if you were interested in looking at that.
Yeah, sure. Beautiful job. Thank you.
All right, that's all the time that we have. Thanks again. I'm sure Rob will be up here if anybody has any other questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.